silence was the worst part. 3 hours ago. The Rakos Valley had been a designated green zone, a strip of demilitarized dust and scrub brush meant to host the first face-to-face heavy diplomatic exchange between the Human Alliance and the Sangari Dominion in 20 years. Now, it sounded like a tomb. Corporal Jace Rowan pushed a slab of twisted composite metal off his legs and gasped, sucking in air that tasted of sulfur and pulverized rock. He coughed, a wet, hacking sound that seemed too loud in the stillness. His combat armor, the standard issue matte gray of the Alliance infantry, was scorched black on the left side, and his heads-up display was dead. A jagged crack ran diagonally across his visor. He clawed at the seals and ripped the helmet off, tossing it into the gray ash that covered the ground like snow. The convoy was gone. 6 heavy transports, 2 diplomatic cruisers, and a vanguard of Sangari skimmers had been vaporized. Jace squinted through the drifting smoke. There were no craters, which was the terrifying part. Whatever had hit them had not been kinetic artillery. It had been an orbital lance, a precision energy strike that boiled the air and melted durasteel into slag in a nanosecond. He tried to stand and fell back to one knee. His head swam, checked the perimeter. His training screamed. Jace forced himself up. He was 28 years old, a 10-year veteran of the border wars, and he knew that silence usually meant the enemy was reloading. He unslung his rifle, checking the charge. It was at 40%, enough to kill a few scavengers, but useless against a Dominion heavy. He scanned the horizon. The sky above the valley was wrong. Normally, the atmosphere of this planet was a pale, washed-out blue. Today, the sky was bruised purple, ripped apart by silent violet ribbons of energy that twisted and coiled like snakes. It was an electromagnetic storm, but not a natural one. That kind of atmospheric distortion meant high-yield jamming tech. It meant no comms, no medevac, no backup. Jace tapped his earbead. Static. Just a wall of white noise that made his teeth ache. He began to walk through the wreckage, his boots crunching on glass and bone. He was looking for survivors, but he knew he would not find any humans. The heat of the blast had been concentrated on the Alliance carriers. He passed the melted hull of the lead transport, seeing the charred remains of what had been the diplomatic envoy. Then he heard it. It was not a cry for help. It was a rhythm. A low, thumping bass note that vibrated in his chest rather than his ears. Thump, thump. Thump, thump. Jace froze, swinging his rifle toward a pile of debris 50 meters to his right. The wreckage there was different. It was not the blocky, utilitarian metal of the Alliance. It was sleek, crimson and obsidian, curved like the carapace of a beetle, a Sangari transport pod. The Sangari did not build ships. They grew them, weaving biotechnology with hyperalloys. This pod had been torn open, its organic hull weeping a clear, viscous fluid that smelled of ozone and copper. The heartbeat grew louder as he approached. Jace climbed over a piece of burning wreckage, the heat scorching his face. In the center of the crash site, half buried in the ash, lay the remains of a stasis cradle, and inside it was the source of the heartbeat. She was the most terrifyingly beautiful thing Jace had ever seen. The woman was tall, even curled in the fetal position against the broken restraints of the pod. Her skin was the color of moonlight on snow, stark white against the jagged black metal. She wore ceremonial armor, a breastplate of articulated red ceramic that looked like muscle fibers, and a flowing skirt of some ballistic weave that was now tattered and stained. Jace lowered his rifle but kept his finger on the guard, a Sangari, a vampire. The slurs came easy to his mind, drilled in by a decade of propaganda. But looking at her, they felt inadequate. She had the high, sharp cheekbones and oversized dark eyes of her species, features that made humans look unrefined and unfinished. Her hair was a spill of ink-black silk, partially matting around a wound on her temple. But the real damage was lower. A shard of the pod's hull, a piece of metal the size of a bayonet, had punched through her side, just below the ribs. It pinned her to the backing of the seat. The violet fluid that served as Sangari blood was pooling beneath her, shimmering in the odd light of the storm. She was dying. The heartbeat he heard was her physiology going into overdrive, her heart pumping harder to compensate for the catastrophic loss of pressure. Jace stepped closer. His boot hit a piece of metal, a sharp clang. The woman's eyes snapped open. They were red, not the dull rust color of dried blood, but a luminous burning crimson, with vertical slit pupils that dilated instantly as they locked onto him. She hissed, a sound like steam escaping a valve, and her lips pulled back. Her fangs were fully extended, needle-sharp and glistening. She thrashed, trying to lunge at him, but the metal shard through her torso held her fast. She cried out, a guttural sound of agony. "Do not move," Jace said, keeping his voice flat and hard. "You are injured." The woman stared at him, her chest heaving, her hands, tipped with black claws, scrabbled uselessly at the armor plating of the pod. She looked at his uniform, at the Alliance insignia on his shoulder, and her fear transmuted instantly into hatred. "Soldier," she rasped. Her voice was breathy, heavily accented. She spoke basic, but the words felt unnatural in her throat. "You came to finish it." "No," Jace said. "I am checking for survivors." "There are none," she spat. "Only dust, and a broken prize." She slumped back, the burst of adrenaline fading as her body realized it had no fuel left. Her eyes fluttered, the crimson dimming to a muddy maroon. Jace looked at the wound. It was bad. If he pulled the shard out, she would bleed out in seconds. If he left it in, the internal trauma would kill her in minutes. Her physiology was superior to a human's in almost every way. Stronger, faster healing, but it ran hot. They burned energy at a terrifying rate. Without blood volume to sustain the oxygen transport, her brain would shut down. He should walk away. That was the smart play. She was the enemy. The Sangari Dominion had glassed 3 of the outer colonies. They looked at humans as cattle, as livestock to be managed or culled. But Jace Rowan had never been good at the smart play. He slung his rifle over his back and dropped to his knees beside the pod. "Get away," she whispered. Her hand twitched, trying to form a claw, but her fingers were trembling. "I am a combat medic certified for level 2 triage." Jace lied. He was just a grunt with an advanced first aid badge, but she did not need to know that. "I am going to stabilize you. Why?" She looked at him with genuine confusion. "I am Sangari." Jace didn't answer. He opened the magnetic clasp of his medkit and spread it out on the ash. He pulled out a bioactive clotting foam, a trauma scanner, and a hydration pack. He ran the scanner over her. The device beeped an angry red warning. Subject biology incompatible with standard coagulation agents. Hemoglobin count critical. Systemic failure in 90 seconds. 90 seconds. Jace cursed. He looked at the hydration pack. Useless. Her biology was based on a copper-rich hemocyanin hybrid, but it still required volume to pump. Saline would just dilute what little she had left, sending her into shock faster. She needed blood. Sangari could process human blood. It was the one biological fact that fueled the entire war. They could eat normal food, but for rapid healing, for combat, for survival, they needed heme. It acted as a catalyst for their regenerative cells. Jace looked at his own arm. He was O-negative. Universal donor for humans. For Sangari, human blood was a high-octane fuel. He looked at the woman. Her eyes were rolling back. Her breathing was a shallow hitch. "Do not die on me," he muttered. He grabbed the field transfusion kit. It was a simple, brutal piece of gear. 2 heavy-gauge needles connected by a thick, clear tube with a manual pump bulb in the middle. He ripped the sleeve of his uniform, exposing the crook of his left arm. He tied a tourniquet with his teeth, slapped the vein until it bulged, and shoved the intake needle in. He hissed at the sting. Then he turned to her. She was fading fast. He needed a vein. He reached for her neck. Her eyes snapped open again, wide and terrified. She grabbed his wrist with shocking strength. "No," she gasped. "No touch. I am Saren Kale. I am War Bride, Forbidden." Jace ignored the title. He did not care about her rank. He cared about the fact that her heart rate was dropping. "Saren, listen to me," he said, leaning close. His face was inches from hers. He could smell lilacs and ozone. "You are bleeding out. I have to give you a transfusion. I have to give you my blood." The words hit her like a physical blow. Her pupils blew wide, swallowing the crimson iris. "Your blood? It is the only way," Jace said. He did not wait for permission. He saw the port on her neck, a small biointerface node just below the jawline that Sangari armor used to inject combat stims. He guessed it accessed the jugular. He jammed the output needle into the port. Saren arched her back, a high, keening sound escaping her throat. Jace squeezed the pump bulb. He watched the dark red flow of his own blood shoot through the tube. It hit the clear violet fluid of her system and swirled, a dark cloud invading a calm sky. The reaction was instantaneous. Saren gasped, her entire body seizing. Her hand, which had been holding his wrist to stop him, suddenly clamped down, her claws digging into his flesh. It hurt, but Jace did not pull away. "More," she whispered. Her voice had changed. It was no longer weak. It was a hungry growl. Jace pumped the bulb again. He could feel the drain immediately. It was not just the physical loss of fluid, it was something else. A coldness spreading up his arm. A strange, static-like tingling that rushed from his veins into hers. The myth said that when a Sangari fed, they took more than just blood. They took memories. They took feelings. Jace had always thought it was barrack superstition. He was wrong. As his blood entered her, the world around him dissolved. He was no longer kneeling in the ash. He was standing in a high tower of obsidian, looking out over a city that glowed with bioluminescent fungus. He felt a crushing weight of duty. He felt silk against his skin and cold metal against his throat. "You are the price," a voice said. A cold, maternal voice. "You are the currency of peace. Saren, do not fail us." He felt her terror. It was a cold, sharp thing in her gut. She was being sold, traded like livestock to the humans to secure a treaty she knew was a lie. She was alone, so incredibly alone. Then the image shattered. Jace gasped, his vision graying at the edges. He was back in the valley, but the connection remained. He could feel her inside his head, and he knew she could feel him. He felt her tasting his memories. She was sifting through the image of his squad mates laughing in the mess hall 3 days ago. She tasted the grief he carried for Miller, who had died at the crossing. She tasted the deep, hollow loneliness that Jace hid behind his sarcasm and his rifle. "Soldier," her voice echoed in his mind. "You are sad." Jace gritted his teeth. He squeezed the pump again. He was getting dizzy. He had pushed maybe a pint, maybe more. "That is enough," he muttered, his tongue feeling thick. He tried to pull the needle from her neck. She would not let him. Her hand was a vice on his forearm. Her eyes were locked on his, and they were blazing with a terrifying intensity. The crimson was swirling, glowing like a nebula. "No," she said aloud. Her voice was strong now, resonant. "Do not stop." "Saren," Jace warned. "Let go." The blood bond. It was ancient Sangari law. He had heard the stories. If you gave blood willingly, you forged a link. But he had thought that was just ritualistic nonsense. He felt her hunger. It was a physical force, pulling at him. She wanted to drain him dry. It would be so easy. It would feel so good. Jace slapped her hand with his free palm. A sharp, stinging blow. "Let go!" he shouted. The shock broke her trance. Saren blinked, the predatory haze lifting just enough for her to realize what she was doing. She looked at the tube, at the red blood pumping into her, and then at Jace's pale, sweating face. She released his arm instantly, looking horrified. I apologize," she whispered. Jace yanked the needle from her neck and then from his own arm. He slapped a pressure patch over his puncture wound. He swayed, the world tilting sideways. He sat back hard in the ash, breathing heavily. Worst blind date ever. Jace mumbled, closing his eyes. He heard a shifting of ash. When he opened his eyes, Saren had turned her head. She was watching him. Her skin had lost its deathly pallor. A faint flush of color had returned to her cheeks. The wound in her side was already clotting, the black blood turning into a hard, resin-like scab. "You gave me your blood," she said softly. It was not a question. It was a statement of absolute disbelief. "You were dying," Jace said, leaning his head back against the twisted metal of the pod. "Don't read into it." "You do not understand," Saren said. She reached out, her hand hovering over his knee but not touching him. "In my culture, to share the vein, it is not done lightly. It creates a debt, a bind." "Yeah. Well," Jace said, feeling the darkness creeping in at the corners of his vision. "Just pay me back by not eating me when I pass out." He saw her expression shift. The haughty, aristocratic mask crumbled, revealing something raw and bewildered underneath. "You are mine now," she whispered. The words seemed to slip out before she could stop them. Jace chuckled, a dry sound. "Sure, lady. Whatever you say." He let his head drop. The exhaustion claimed him. He woke to the sound of screaming engines. Jace jerked awake, his hand instinctively going for his rifle. But his limbs felt like lead. The wind was whipping the ash into a frenzy. Above him, 3 Alliance extraction dropships were hovering, their thrusters turning the air into a chaotic vortex. Searchlights cut through the violet gloom, blinding him. "Secure the perimeter!" A voice amplified by loudspeakers boomed. "Threat detected. Neutralize the target." Jace squinted. He saw red laser sights dancing through the smoke, dozens of them, and they were all pointed at the same spot. They were pointed at Saren. She had pulled herself out of the pod. She was standing over him, her legs shaky but her posture defiant. She stood between Jace and the approaching rescue team, her arms spread wide. Her crimson armor was battered, but she looked like a queen of war. Her fangs were bared, and a low, menacing growl rumbled from her chest, loud enough to be heard over the dropship engines. "Hold fire!" Jace tried to shout, but his voice was a croak. A squad of armored Alliance Marines hit the ground, weapons raised. "Step away from the casualty," the lead Marine shouted. "Step away, leech, or we will open fire." Saren did not flinch. She did not step back. She looked at the heavy plasma rifles pointed at her chest and laughed. It was a terrifying sound. "He is not a casualty," she shouted. Her voice carried a strange harmonic resonance that made the Marines hesitate. She looked down at Jace, her red eyes burning. Then she looked back at the soldiers. "He is my blood-bound," she declared. The Marines exchanged confused glances. The term meant nothing to them, but the tone of her voice made the hair on the back of Jace's neck stand up. "The human soldier gave his blood to a dying war bride," Saren announced, her voice rising to a shriek of possessive fury. "By the laws of the Dominion and the blood in his veins, he is mine. Now and until the stars burn out, I will not let him go." Political chaos. Jace closed his eyes and groaned. That was the only way to describe what was about to happen. The lead Marine looked confused. "Command, we have a situation. The HVT is hostile. She is claiming the survivor." Jace forced himself to sit up. He had to stop this before they turned her into Swiss cheese. "Stand down," Jace yelled, finding his command voice. "She is a non-combatant. She is the diplomatic envoy." He staggered to his feet, swaying. Saren was instantly at his side, her arm wrapping around his waist to support him. He felt the cold hardness of her armor and the intense heat of her body radiating through it. "Don't shoot," Jace said, waving his hand at his own side. "We are coming in." The Marines did not lower their weapons, but they did not fire. They looked at the strange tableau, a battered, dirty human grunt supported by a towering, terrifying alien vampire princess who looked ready to tear the throat out of anyone who came within 5 feet of him. "Secure them both," the voice from the dropship ordered. "Quarantine protocol, level 4. The flight back to the forward operating base was tense. Jace and Saren were placed in a containment module at the back of the dropship. 2 armed guards watched them through the reinforced plexiglass. Saren sat on the bench opposite Jace. She refused to sit anywhere else. She watched him with an intensity that made him want to check his armor for holes. "You should not have claimed me back there," Jace said quietly, rubbing his temples. "You just made things complicated." "Complicated is better than dead," Saren replied. She ran a long, clawed finger over the dried blood on her own armor. "You saved my life, Jace Rowan." "It was standard procedure," Jace said, looking away. "No," Saren said, "it was not. I felt your mind. You knew the risks. You knew what I was, and you gave the blood anyway." She leaned forward. The shackles on her wrists clinked. "Why?" she asked. Jace looked at her. Really looked at her. He saw the intelligence behind the predator's eyes, and because nobody deserves to die alone in the dirt, he said. Saren stared at him for a long moment. Then, slowly, the corner of her mouth quirked up. Not a snarl this time, a smile. "You are a strange human," she said. The dropship touched down with a heavy thud. The doors hissed open, revealing a team of biohazard troops and angry-looking officers. "Get them to the secure wing," a colonel was shouting. "Separate them immediately," as the soldiers rushed in to grab them. Saren's eyes flashed red again. "Do not touch him," she hissed as they grabbed her arms. Jace was hauled in the opposite direction. He looked back. Saren was being dragged away by 4 men, but she wasn't fighting them. She was looking at him. Her expression was a mix of hunger, curiosity, and a terrifying, absolute possessiveness. She mouthed 2 words to him as the blast doors separated them. "My blood." Jace was shoved onto a gurney and wheeled down a sterile white corridor. The adrenaline was fading, leaving him cold and empty. He stared up at the passing lights. He had survived the crash. He had survived the storm. But as he thought about the look in Saren Cale's eyes, Jace Rowan realized the truly dangerous part of his life had just begun. The waking world was white, not the soft, hazy white of morning mist, but the aggressive, stinging white of high-lumen medical LEDs. Corporal Jace Rowan blinked, trying to scrape the grit from his eyes. His body felt heavy, as if gravity had been dialed up by 20%. He tried to sit up, but a restraint strap across his chest held him firm against the biobed. He was wired into a bank of monitors that chirped and hummed with a rhythm that did not match his own heartbeat. Easy. Corporal. The voice was thin and nervous. Jace turned his head, the muscles in his neck protesting. A man in a white lab coat stood by a holographic display, tapping frantically at the floating data streams. He looked like he had not slept in a week. Next to him stood a woman who looked like she slept standing up, if at all. Colonel Holloway, the base commander. Her uniform was crisp, her face carved from granite. "What is the status?" "Doctor," Holloway asked, ignoring Jace's attempt to speak. Dr. Eris adjusted his glasses. "It is unprecedented, Colonel. We have run the genetic sequencer 3 times. The Sangari subject's physiology has not just accepted the human blood, it has reconfigured around it." Jace managed to clear his throat. "It tasted like antiseptic and old pennies. Am I under arrest, Colonel?" Holloway looked down at him. Her eyes were cold, calculating. "That depends. Rowan, did you know what you were doing when you stuck a needle in that creature's neck?" "I was saving a life." "Ma'am," Jace rasped, "protocol says we render aid to non-combatants. Protocol didn't account for biofusing yourself to a vampire princess," Holloway snapped. She gestured to the doctor. "Explain it to him." Dr. Eris stepped forward, wringing his hands. "Corporal, the Sangari are not just hemivores. They are genetic mimics. Their immune systems are designed to adapt to whatever biological environment they find themselves in. Usually, this process takes weeks. But when you performed a direct vein-to-vein transfusion while she was in critical trauma failure—" "Get to the point," Holloway growled. The doctor swallowed hard. "Her cells latched onto your genetic markers as a lifeline. She didn't just drink your blood. Jace, she imprinted on it. In ethological terms, it is a survival bond. Her body now recognizes your specific biological signature as essential to her continued existence. It is a one-way dependency that has created a two-way psychological link." Jace stared at the ceiling. "So, she is allergic to everyone but me?" Eris grimaced. "That is a gross oversimplification, but effectively, yes. If she is separated from your biorhythm for too long, her cortisol levels spike. She becomes unstable, aggressive, and you might experience some sympathetic feedback." Sympathetic feedback. It sounded like a euphemism for a headache. Jace was released from the restraints an hour later, only to be escorted by 2 armed MPs to the observation sector. The base, carved into the bedrock of the planet's crust, was a labyrinth of gray corridors and buzzing air recyclers. The air smelled of ozone and anxiety. They stopped at a heavy blast door marked Quarantine Level 5. Holloway punched in a code. The door slid open to reveal a darkened viewing gallery. One wall was entirely made of hyperglass, looking into a stark, brightly lit containment cell. Inside, Saren Kale was pacing. She moved like a tiger in a cage, fluid, restless, and radiating a quiet violence. They had stripped her of her crimson armor, replacing it with a simple gray prisoner's jumpsuit that looked wrong on her. It was too loose, hiding the lethal grace of her frame. She was barefoot. Around her, a shimmering field of blue energy hummed. A kinetic restraint field that would shock her if she moved too fast or tried to strike the glass. She stopped pacing the moment Jace entered the gallery. She did not look at the colonel or the guards. Her eyes burning with that unsettling crimson light, locked onto Jace. She stepped up to the glass. "Open the audio channel," Holloway ordered. The speakers crackled to life. "You look terrible, soldier," Saren said. Her voice was smooth, carrying a mocking lilt that did not quite mask the tension in her jaw. Jace walked up to the glass, ignoring Holloway's warning hand. "You tried to eat me. Saren, I think I am allowed to look a little pale." "I took what was offered," she countered, tilting her head. "And now your healers treat me like a laboratory specimen. They poke, they scan. They are cautious cattle, terrified of the wolf in the pen." "You are a political hostage, not a wolf," Holloway said into the mic, her voice hard. "And you are here because your people blew up a peace convoy." Saren's gaze flicked to the colonel, cold and dismissive, before returning to Jace. She pressed her palm against the glass. Jace felt a strange tug in his chest, a physical sensation like a hook pulling behind his ribs. He stepped closer, mirroring her movement, though he did not touch the glass. "They are afraid," Saren said softly, speaking only to him. "I can smell it on them. Sweat and cortisol. But you smell like iron and fatigue. It's called a long day," Jace said. "Why are you here?" she asked. Jace shrugged, trying to keep his tone light. "The doctor says we are stuck together. Some kind of blood voodoo." Her eyes narrowed. "It is not voodoo. It is the law of the vein. You bound us. Jace Rowan. You made me vulnerable." She said the word vulnerable like it was a curse. Before Jace could reply, a chime sounded from the console behind them. Holloway turned, tapping a button. A holographic emitter sprang to life, projecting the flickering blue image of a man in a high-collared formal suit. Ambassador Vane, the Alliance's chief negotiator. Even in hologram form, he looked immaculate and deeply unhappy. "Report." "Colonel," Vane said. His voice was clipped. "We have secured the Sangari asset," Holloway said. "But there are complications." "Complications?" Vane sneered. "The Dominion is already screaming for blood. They claim we kidnapped Lady Saren. They are threatening to mobilize the Third Fleet. And I am hearing reports that she has been contaminated?" Holloway glanced at Jace. "There was a medical emergency. A soldier performed a field transfusion to save her life." Vane's face twisted in disgust. "A common soldier? You let a grunt mix blood with a high-born diplomat? Do you have any idea what this does to her value? She was a bride meant for a sector governor, not a biology experiment for an infantryman." Jace stiffened. He watched Saren through the glass. She could not hear the ambassador. The audio channel was one way. But she was watching Jace's reaction, reading the anger in the set of his shoulders. "She has ruined goods." Vane spat. "The Dominion won't take her back. Not like this. Half the Senate wants to hand her over and apologize. The other half wants to execute her and claim she was a spy. This peace treaty is dead in the water, Colonel. And that soldier just handed the Warhawks on both sides exactly the excuse they needed." Jace felt a cold knot form in his stomach. He wasn't a hero. He was a mistake, a wrench in the gears of a machine much bigger than he was. "Keep them contained," Vane ordered. "If the treaty fails, we are going to need leverage. And if she is as bonded to this soldier as the report says, then he is the leash we use to control her." The hologram flickered and died. Jace looked back at the glass. Saren was still watching him, her expression unreadable. She raised a hand and tapped the glass where his heart would be. Night cycle on the base was artificial. Lights dimmed to a dull amber, the hum of the ventilation fans dropping a decibel. Jace lay in his bunk in the secure quarters, staring at the bottom of the mattress above him. He closed his eyes, hoping for oblivion. Instead, he fell into a nightmare that was not his own. The sky was a bruised plum color, lit by two moons that hung heavy and close. The air smelled of spices and copper. He was standing on a platform of black stone, surrounded by tall figures in crimson robes. He looked down at his hands. They were pale, slender, tipped with black claws. He was holding a ceremonial dagger. "Drink," a voice commanded. It was a woman's voice, cold as ice. "Drink and remember what you are." He looked up. A woman stood before him, Saren's mother, tall and terrifying. "Do not weep. Saren, tears are water. We deal in blood. You are a tool to be used, a blade to be sheathed in the heart of our enemies, or a coin to be spent for peace. You have no self. You have only duty." He felt a crushing, suffocating loneliness. The feeling of being an object, polished and perfect and utterly hollow. Jace gasped, thrashing in his sheets. But the dream shifted. Now he was in a trench. The mud was freezing. The air screamed with incoming artillery. Miller was next to him, laughing about a card game. Then the world turned white. When the dust cleared, Miller was gone. Just a red mist and a pair of boots. He felt the survivor's guilt, heavy as a stone in his gut. The wish that the shell had hit him instead. Jace woke with a gasp, sitting bolt upright. He was sweating, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. At the exact same moment, 3 corridors away in the containment cell. Saren Kale woke with a sharp intake of breath, clutching her chest. They sat there in the darkness, separated by walls and security fields, but connected by a psychic thread that hummed with shared terror. Jace rubbed his face, his hands shaking. He could still taste the copper wine from her memory. He knew, with absolute certainty, that she was tasting the mud from his. Then, the lights went out, not the dimming of the night cycle, a hard, sudden blackness. The hum of the ventilation fans died. The electronic lock on his door clicked, a failsafe disengaging. A siren began to wail. A low, mournful sound. Security alert. System compromise. Sector 4, Sector 5. The base AI's voice was distorted, slowing down and speeding up. A hack. Someone had hit the base's central nervous system. Jace rolled out of bed, grabbing his sidearm from the lockbox, which had also popped open. He moved to the door, listening. Footsteps. But not the heavy bootfalls of Marines. These were soft, rapid, barely whispering against the floor plates. Jace raised his weapon. The door slid open. Saren stood there. She was out of her cell. The power failure must have dropped the kinetic field. In the flashing red light of the emergency strobes, she looked like a demon. Her eyes were glowing, her fangs bared, her body crouched low. She could have run. The hangar bay was only 2 turns away. She could have killed a dozen guards in the dark and stolen a shuttle. But she had come here. She looked at Jace, her chest heaving. She took a step into the room, kicking the door shut behind her. "You," she breathed. She crossed the distance between them in a blur, dropping into a crouch beside his bed. She didn't attack. She grabbed his arm, the one he had used for the transfusion, and pressed her forehead against it. "Saren?" Jace lowered the gun, his heart racing. "What are you doing?" "The noise," she whispered, her voice trembling. "The screaming in the dark. Your mind." It was screaming. She looked up at him. The predatory rage was gone, replaced by a desperate, feral need for reassurance. The bond had pulled her through the complex like a magnet. "I'm okay," Jace said, instinctively reaching out to touch her shoulder. It was just a dream. She shuddered under his hand. The contact seemed to ground her. The red glow in her eyes dimmed slightly. "I could not leave," she admitted, her voice sounding angry at herself. "The systems fell. The path was open, but I could not go further than this room. It felt like dying." The door hissed open again. Beams of tactical lights flooded the room. Freeze! 6 Marines stood in the doorway, weapons trained on Saren's back. Saren hissed, spinning around, placing herself between the guns and Jace. She crouched, claws extending, ready to shred the first man who stepped through the door. "Don't shoot!" Jace yelled, throwing himself in front of her. "She's secured. I have her." The lead Marine hesitated. "Corporal, she's under control." Jace lied, his hands raised. He could feel Saren vibrating against his back, a coiled spring of lethal energy. He reached back and gripped her wrist, squeezing hard. "Stand down, Saren." She tensed, resisting him. Then slowly, the growl in her throat died away. She straightened up, though she kept her glare fixed on the soldiers. The power flickered and returned. The hack was over as quickly as it had begun. The interrogation room was less sterile than the medical bay, but infinitely more uncomfortable. Jace sat on one side of a metal table, Saren on the other. Colonel Holloway paced the length of the room. "We traced the glitch," Holloway said. "It was a localized pulse. Someone wanted the security grid down for exactly 90 seconds. Just long enough for a prisoner to escape, or be killed." She looked at Saren. "But you didn't escape. You went to the corporal's quarters." Saren did not look at the colonel. She was staring at her hands, which were clasped tightly on the table. "I told you," she said, her voice low. "I am bound." "Explain it," Holloway demanded. "And this time, drop the mysticism." Saren looked up. Her expression was fierce. "It is not mysticism. It is biology. Among the Sangari, blood is the carrier of the soul. To share it is the deepest act of trust. To share it as we did, directly, violently, to save a life, it creates a resonance." She pointed a clawed finger at Jace. "He is the anchor. My physiology has adapted to his rhythm. If I go too far from him, my body begins to reject its own autonomic functions. Panic, pain, eventual organ failure." She leaned forward, her eyes blazing. "You think I want this? To be tethered to a human, to an enemy? It is a humiliation, but it is the law of my blood. If he dies, a part of me dies. I cannot abandon him." The room was silent. Jace felt the weight of her words settling on him. It wasn't just affection or gratitude. It was a biological imperative. She literally couldn't leave him. Holloway stopped pacing. She looked from Saren to Jace, a new plan forming in her eyes. "So, you need him close to function? To be rational?" "Yes." Saren spat. Holloway nodded slowly. "Fine. Then we are going to use that. Corporal Rowan, you are hereby reassigned. You are no longer infantry. You are now the primary liaison and handler for the Sangari prisoner." "What?" Jace blinked. "Colonel, I'm not an intelligence officer." "No," Holloway said. "You're a battery. And apparently, you're the only thing keeping our star witness from going feral. You will oversee her daily routine. You will conduct her cultural debriefings, and you will help her analyze the data from the crash site." She leaned over the table. "We need to know who hit that convoy. Lady Saren. And since you won't talk to my interrogators without trying to rip their throats out, you're going to talk to him." The next week was a surreal blur of awkward intimacy and high-stakes tension. Jace was moved into a secure suite adjacent to Saren's cell. He spent 12 hours a day with her. They ate together in the small, heavily guarded mess hall designated for high-risk detainees. The meals were a disaster. Saren refused the synthetic nutrient paste the humans offered. "It smells like despair," she told Jace, pushing the bowl away. "It's protein," Jace said, shoveling a spoonful into his mouth. "Eat it. You need the calories." She watched him eat, her gaze drifting to his neck. Jace felt the familiar prickle of heat. "Stop looking at me like I'm a menu item," he said. "I am not." she lied smoothly. I am merely admiring the inefficiency of your mastication. They did language exchanges to pass the time. She taught him High Sangari, a language of clicks and sibilant hisses that felt like trying to speak with a mouthful of water. No, she corrected him, tapping his hand. You are saying I surrender my sword. You want to say pass the salt. The inflection is on the throat, not the tongue. Your language is like chewing rocks, Jace muttered. And yours is like barking, she retorted. But beneath the banter, the bond was always there. When Jace got a headache, Saren would rub her temples. When Saren felt a spike of anxiety about her imprisonment, Jace would find himself pacing the room, unable to sit still. They discovered that his pulse had a sedative effect on her. During a debriefing where the stress of recounting the attack made her hands shake, Jace had instinctively placed his hand over hers. She had frozen, focusing on the beat of his heart through his wrist. Her breathing slowed, her eyes cleared. It was intimate in a way that had nothing to do with romance and everything to do with survival. Then came the data. The black box from the Sangari transport had been partially corrupted, but tech recovery had pulled the flight telemetry. Jace and Saren sat side by side in a darkened analysis room, staring at a holographic projection of the Rakos Valley. Here, Jace said, pointing to a jagged line on the graph. This is the moment of impact. The energy spike matches an orbital lance. Saren leaned in, her shoulder brushing his. She smelled of the antiseptic soap the base provided. But underneath, there was that faint, spicy scent of her people. The vector is wrong, she murmured. The Sangari Dominion uses plasma-based lances. They leave a thermal bloom that lingers for seconds. Look at this decay rate. She traced the line of light with her finger. The energy dissipated instantly. That is a hard light laser, Jace frowned. He tapped the console, pulling up the Alliance Naval Database. He overlaid the signature. It matched perfectly. He sat back, feeling cold. That's a Class A particle lance. That's Alliance tech. Saren looked at him, her expression grim. A human ship fired on the convoy? Not just any ship, Jace said. He highlighted the frequency modulation. That's a heavy cruiser signature, but the sector was supposed to be clear. The only ships authorized in orbit were the diplomatic transports. He looked at Saren. This wasn't an accident, and it wasn't a rogue faction using stolen gear. That's a distinct command code. A conspiracy, Saren whispered. Jace nodded. Someone on my side wanted this peace talk to fail. They wanted you dead, and someone on my side lowered the shields to let them do it, Saren added. Her voice was hard. My transport's defenses were offline. I thought it was a malfunction, but if your people fired, my people had to have opened the door. She stood up, pacing the small room. We are being played. Jace, the war is ending, and there are powerful people who are terrified of peace. Jace watched her. She looked furious, but also terrified. The realization that her own family might have been involved in her attempted assassination was hitting her hard. I can decode the rest, she said suddenly, turning to him. The black box has a secondary layer of Sangari encryption. The black site logs. It will tell us exactly which ship was in communication with my transport before the blast. Do it, Jace said. I will, she said, but on one condition. She walked over to him, standing so close that he had to tilt his head back to look her in the eyes. The crimson irises were swirling. If we uncover who did this, if we find the names, you do not go to them alone. Jace blinked. Saren, I'm a soldier. If I have evidence, you are a pawn, she hissed, grabbing the lapels of his uniform, just as I was. If you take this to your colonel or your ambassador, you might be handing it to the very people who ordered the strike. They will silence you." She tightened her grip, pulling him slightly closer. "And you are my blood-bound. I will not let you go to your death for people who see you as expendable. We do this together, or we do not do it at all." Jace looked at her. He saw the fierce protectiveness in her face. He realized, with a start, that she was the only person in the universe right now who actually gave a damn whether he lived or died. Not because he was a good soldier, but because he was hers. He covered her hands with his own. "Okay," he said softly. "Together." The tension in the room shifted. It wasn't just fear anymore. There was a spark of something else, a mutual recognition. They were two outcasts, tied together by blood and betrayal, standing on the edge of a cliff. Saren held his gaze for a second longer than necessary, her breath hitching slightly. Then she stepped back, smoothing her jumpsuit, the mask of the haughty noblewoman sliding back into place. "Good," she said, turning back to the hologram. "Now, let us see which of our leaders is the bigger hypocrite." Jace watched her work, the violet light of the hologram reflecting in her eyes. He couldn't help but smile, a grim, humorless quirk of the lips. He was in trouble. Deep, treasonous trouble. And looking at the vampire princess who had just claimed his life as her personal property, he realized he wouldn't have it any other way. The transport manifest was stamped with a digital seal that looked like a tombstone. Corporal Jace Rowan stood in the airlock staging area of Sector 4, watching the heavy blast doors shudder under the impact of the docking clamps. The transfer team had arrived, 4 heavily armored MPs from the Special Rendition Unit, faceless behind polarized visors, stood waiting with kinetic shackles. They were here for Saren. Jace adjusted the strap of his rifle, his knuckles white. The order had come down an hour ago from Ambassador Vane's office. Lady Saren Kale was to be moved to a deep space black site, a facility known euphemistically as the Vault. It was a hole in space where political liabilities went to disappear. Saren stood in the center of the holding cell, behind the energy barrier. She was back in the gray jumpsuit, her back straight, her chin lifted. She looked like a queen waiting for the executioner. Jace stepped up to the barrier. "They are here," he said. His voice felt hollow. "I can hear them," Saren replied. She did not turn to face him. Her reflection in the glass was ghostly. Their hearts are slow, deliberate. They enjoy their work. "I tried to appeal the transfer," Jace said, and he hated the defensive note in his voice. The colonel wouldn't listen. "They think you are too dangerous to keep on a forward base." "I am too dangerous," Saren said, turning finally. Her eyes were dark, the crimson irises dull, "because I know too much, and because I am bound to a human who asks too many questions." She stepped closer, the magnetic hum of the barrier vibrating between them. "Do not follow me." "Jace," she whispered. "When they take me, the bond will stretch. It will hurt. But you must let it snap. If you try to find me, they will kill you." "I'm not in the habit of abandoning my squad," Jace muttered. "You and I are not a squad," Saren said sharply. "We are a biological accident." Before Jace could reply, the airlock cycled. The inner doors hissed open, but instead of the 4 MPs he expected, a metal sphere the size of a human head rolled into the room. It stopped, spinning on a gyroscope. A single red eye blinked in the center. Jace's combat instincts, honed by 10 years of trench warfare, screamed one word: drop. He threw himself flat just as the sphere detonated. It wasn't a frag grenade. It was a sonic pulse. The world turned into a white-hot, ringing silence. The energy barrier protecting Saren's cell flickered and died. The blast doors blew inward, twisted like wet cardboard, Through the smoke, shadows moved. They were not human. They were not Sangari. They were drones, sleek, arachnid machines made of matte black chrome, moving on silent magnetic legs. They scuttled across the ceiling and walls, their forelimbs transforming into rapid-fire projectile cannons. Jace scrambled to cover behind an overturned loading crate, his ears ringing. He saw the MPs in the hallway cut down before they could even raise their weapons. The drones were efficient, surgical. His comms bead crackled to life, cutting through the sonic interference. Alert! Sector 4 breach. Hostiles unknown. Jace tapped the bead. Command. This is Rowan. We are under attack. I have the asset. The voice that came back was not the colonel. It was a distorted, synthesized command channel. Corporal Rowan. Order 7 Alpha. Abandon the asset. Fall back to the secondary perimeter. Repeat. Abandon the asset. Let the hostiles proceed. Jace froze. Abandon her? They were letting the drones take her out. Then, a second voice broke in. Colonel Holloway, sounding breathless and angry. Belay that. Rowan, secure the prisoner. She is the only leverage we have. If she dies, we lose the treaty. Jace looked over the crate. 3 drones were converging on Saren's cell. She had backed into the corner, grabbing a shard of metal from the ruined doorframe. She looked terrified, not for herself, but Jace felt it through the bond. She was terrified because she could feel his heart rate spiking. The drones weren't trying to capture her. They were charging their primary weapons. They were there to scrub the timeline. Order. Screw the orders. Jace growled. He popped up, shouldering his rifle. He didn't aim for the drones, they were too fast. He aimed for the coolant pipe running along the ceiling directly above them. He fired 3 rounds. The pipe burst, spraying supercooled liquid nitrogen down in a thick white fog. The drones screeched as their sensors were blinded and their joints froze. Jace sprinted. He vaulted the debris, sliding across the floor into the open cell. He grabbed Saren's arm. Move! He roared. Saren didn't argue. She moved with him, her bare feet silent on the deck. They bolted into the corridor, turning left toward the service lift. Behind them, the drones recalibrated. The sound of skittering metal on metal got louder. They are fast, Saren hissed. Jace fired blindly behind him as they ran. Who are they? Alliance? Dominion? Neither, Saren said, her voice tight. I can feel their drive signatures. They are hybrids, human processors, Sangari power cells. They reached a junction. A drone dropped from a ventilation hatch directly in front of them, blocking the path. It reared up, a monomolecular blade extending from its chassis. Jace brought his rifle up, but the magazine clicked dry. The drone lunged. Jace braced for the impact, but it never came. Saren shoved him aside with a force that cracked his ribs. She stepped into the drone's path. She didn't have a weapon. She didn't need one. She screamed, a sound of pure, unadulterated rage. Crimson light exploded from her hands. It wasn't fire, it was raw kinetic energy, fueled by her blood. She caught the drone's blade in her bare hand, the energy flaring as it met the metal. She wrenched her arm sideways. There was a sickening tear of metal. She ripped the drone's limb off and drove it into the machine's central eye. The drone spasmed and died, sparks showering over them. Saren stood panting, her hand dripping with dark, oily fluid mixed with her own bright violet blood. She looked wild, her hair flying around her face, her eyes glowing like twin suns. Jace stared at her, scrambling to his feet. He saw a deep gash across her forearm where the blade had caught her. "You're bleeding," he said, reaching for her. Saren looked at the wound, then at him. She laughed, a shaky, hysterical sound. "I may be the worst vampire in history." "Jace Rowan," she muttered, clutching her arm. "I would rather bleed for you than feed from you." "We can analyze the irony later," Jace said, grabbing her uninjured shoulder. "We have to go." He dragged her toward a maintenance hatch. He kicked the latch and the rusted panel clanged open. "In here." They squeezed into the maintenance shaft just as a fresh wave of suppression fire chewed up the wall where they had been standing. The shaft was a nightmare of cramped pipes and steam vents. It smelled of grease and recycled air. They crawled on their hands and knees, Jace in the lead, Saren following close behind. The space was so tight her shoulder kept bumping against his boot. "Are you sure you know where you are going?" Saren whispered. Her voice echoed in the metal tube. "Or is this another human strategy of wandering aimlessly until the enemy dies of boredom?" "I know exactly where I'm going," Jace grunted, taking a sharp right turn that led to a vertical ladder. "I'm heading for the server core." "The server core?" Saren hissed. "We should be heading for the hangar." "We can't leave yet," Jace said, starting to climb. The black box data. "The drones aren't just here to kill you. Saren, they're scrubbing the base. If they destroy the mainframes, we lose the proof that the peace convoy was sabotaged. We'll be fugitives with no evidence." He felt her hesitation through the bond, then her begrudging acceptance. "You are stubborn," she muttered, climbing after him. "It is a very unattractive trait," says the woman who stood in front of a killbot, Jace retorted. They emerged from the vent into the server room. It was a massive circular chamber filled with towering banks of crystal optical drives. The air was freezing, kept at sub-zero to cool the processors. But they were too late. In the center of the room, a device was clamped to the main console. It was pulsing with a sickly green light. "A data phage," Jace said, cursing. He ran to the console. The screens were cascading with error messages. File deleted. Sector purged. "It's gone," Jace said, slamming his fist on the desk. They wiped it. The telemetry. The black box logs. Everything. Saren walked past him. She didn't look at the screens. She looked at the central drive column, a massive pillar of oscillating quartz. "Data is never truly gone," she said softly. "Not to us." She placed both hands on the freezing crystal surface. "What are you doing?" Jace asked. "Sangari memory crystals store data as resonance," she whispered. "Even when the file is deleted, the echo remains. If I can, taste it." She closed her eyes. The veins in her neck stood out, turning a dark, vibrant purple. Jace watched, fascinated and horrified. He felt the drain through the bond immediately. It felt like someone had pulled a plug in the bottom of his stomach. His energy was flowing into her, fueling her psionic reach. He staggered, gripping the console for support. "Take what you need," he gasped. Saren gasped, her back arching. "I see it," she said, her voice sounding like it was coming from underwater. "The log, the command authorization." She wasn't reading code. She was reliving the moment the command was entered. It was a council, she said, her voice trembling. "Not just humans." "Sangari, I see Admiral Vance, and oh gods." She pulled her hands away from the crystal as if it had burned her. She stumbled back, collapsing into Jace's arms. "Who?" Jace asked, holding her up. "Who was with Vance?" "Lord Kale," she whispered, looking up at him with devastated eyes. "My brother." Jace went cold, her own family. "They sanctioned the strike," Saren said, tears of violet blood welling in her eyes. "It is a joint operation. The Project Zero. They want the war to continue. The budget appropriations. The bioweapon contracts. They are worth trillions. Peace would bankrupt them." The room suddenly turned red. A klaxon began to blare, a sound that drilled into their skulls. Containment Protocol Omega initiated. The AI announced, "Self-destruct sequence active. T-minus 5 minutes." They are blowing the base, Jace said, pulling Saren to her feet to cover their tracks. We need a ship, Saren said, her grief instantly replaced by survival instinct. The main hangar was a war zone. Debris rained from the ceiling as the base's structural integrity began to fail. Fires burned in the fuel pits. Most of the dropships were gone or burning. Only one remained, a battered, rust-streaked cargo hauler that looked like a flying brick. That one, Jace pointed. It's a garbage scow, Saren sneered, even as they sprinted toward it. It's got an engine, Jace yelled. They scrambled up the ramp just as the roof of the hangar began to collapse. Jace hit the button to retract the ramp and ran for the gunnery chair. Can you fly this thing? He shouted. Saren threw herself into the pilot's seat. Her hands flew across the controls. The interface was human, clumsy and analog, but her reflexes were Sangari. It is a bucket of bolts, she shouted back, but it will fly. The engines coughed, then roared to life. The ship lurched upward, scraping the deck. Jace strapped himself in. Punch it! Saren slammed the throttle forward. The cargo hauler shot out of the bay doors just as the fuel reserves of the base detonated. A massive fireball chased them into the upper atmosphere. The shockwave hit the ship like a physical hammer. The hull groaned, warning lights flashing everywhere. Hold together, baby, hold together. Jace prayed. Saren was fighting the stick. Her teeth bared. She pulled the ship into a vertical climb, punching through the violet ribbons of the electromagnetic storm. The G-force pressed them into their seats. We are clearing the gravity well, Saren announced, her voice strained, engaging sublight drives. They broke orbit. The stars appeared, cold and sharp. Below them, the surface of the planet rippled as the base was consumed by a mushroom cloud. Jace let out a breath he felt like he had been holding for an hour. We made it. Do not celebrate yet, Saren said. Look at the sensor scope. Jace looked. A single red dot was tracking them. It wasn't the drones, it was a capital ship signature. A frigate, Jace said, cloaked. It's been waiting in high orbit. They are locking missiles, Saren said. We cannot outrun them in this tub. Jace scanned the star chart. We can't go back to Alliance space, and we can't go to the Dominion. We're dead on arrival either way. Then where? Saren asked. Jace pointed to a cluster of navigational hazards in the asteroid belt of the local moon. There, he said. Outpost Meridian. Saren looked at the chart. The smuggler's moon? It is a hive of scum and villainy. Yeah, Jace said grimly. And right now, scum and villainy are the only friends we've got. Outpost Meridian was an ugly, beautiful scar on the face of the asteroid. It was a floating city built from the cannibalized hulls of 1,000 wrecked starships, welded together into a chaotic ring station. Neon signs in a dozen languages burned in the vacuum, advertising gambling dens, pleasure houses, and black market organ clinics. It was the one place in the sector where no one asked for ID if you had credits. Saren landed the battered cargo hauler on a private pad controlled by a crime syndicate Jace knew from his darker days. He paid the dockmaster with a handful of military-grade power cells he had stolen from the base. They walked into the station's promenade. The air was thick with smoke, incense, and the smell of frying meat that was definitely not beef. Music throbbed from the walls, a heavy industrial beat. Saren pulled the hood of her stolen mechanic's cloak low over her face. She was still wearing the gray jumpsuit, but she had belted it to show her figure, trying to look less like a prisoner and more like a drifter. Keep your head down, Jace muttered, walking close to her. Bounty scanners are everywhere. I feel exposed, Saren whispered. Her senses were overwhelmed. The noise, the chaotic emotions of thousands of people, greed, lust, anger. It was hitting her like a physical wave. Focus on me, Jace said. Just feel me. She grabbed his hand, interlacing their fingers. The contact centered her. They needed a place to sleep, a place to hide. Jace found a capsule hotel near the lower levels. The sign said Sleep Ease in flickering blue neon. The lobby smelled of disinfectant and stale beer. Room for two, Jace told the clerk. A four-armed insectoid cleaning a glass with a dirty rag. One pod? The clerk clicked. Jace looked at Saren. He didn't have enough trade goods for two. One pod, Jace said. The clerk slid a key card across the counter. Level B. Don't make a mess. The pod was a fiberglass tube barely large enough for a single coffin. It was meant for one person to sleep, not two people to hide. Jace climbed in first, then pulled Saren in after him. He sealed the hatch. The sounds of the station muffled instantly. It was tight. Saren had to lie on her side, pressed against the back wall. Jace lay facing her, his chest pressed against hers. There was nowhere else to put their limbs. His leg was tangled between hers. Her arm was draped over his waist. This is undignified, Saren whispered, though her voice lacked its usual bite. It's cozy, Jace whispered back. The lighting in the pod was a soft, dim blue. He could see the flecks of gold in her crimson eyes. He could feel her breath on his chin. The bond hummed between them. In the quiet, intense proximity, it flared up. It wasn't just survival anymore. It was a magnetic pull. Jace became hyper-aware of the curve of her hip, the softness of her lips. Saren's pupils dilated. She could taste his desire. It tasted like spiced rum and adrenaline. You are running hot, soldier, she murmured, her hand sliding up his chest to rest over his heart. You're the one who's a walking furnace, Jace countered, his voice husky. They lay there for a long moment, the tension building, thick and electric. The line between predator and prey, between enemy and ally, was blurring. Jace leaned in just an inch. Saren tilted her head back, her lips parting slightly. Then the vent above their heads exploded. Jace didn't think. He reacted. He shoved Saren down as a figure dropped into the tiny space, a knife flashing in the blue light. Assassin, Jace yelled. The attacker was small, wired, and fast. A stealth suit killer. There was no room to swing a fist. Jace caught the assassin's wrist, slamming it against the pod wall. The knife skittered away. Saren hissed, her fangs descending. She couldn't use her energy blasts in here. It would cook them all. She used her body. She coiled her legs and kicked the assassin in the chest, driving him back against the hatch. The hatch burst open. The three of them tumbled out onto the metal grating of the corridor. Jace rolled to his feet, but the assassin was already up, pulling a second blade. He lunged at Jace. Jace blocked, but the assassin was faster. The blade nicked Jace's cheek. Then Saren was there. She moved like liquid shadow. She grabbed the assassin's shoulder, spun him around, and sank her fangs into the junction between his neck and shoulder armor, not to feed, but to paralyze. The assassin screamed and dropped the knife. Saren swept his legs, slamming him to the deck. She straddled his chest, her hand raised, claws fully extended, ready to rip his throat out. Wait! Jace shouted, grabbing her wrist. Don't kill him! Saren froze, her chest heaving, her eyes wild. Why? He tried to kill you. We need to know who hired him, Jace said. He knelt beside the assassin, who was gasping, his nervous system short-circuiting from the neurotoxin in Saren's bite. Who sent you? Jace demanded, patting the man down. He found a data pad in his pocket. It displayed 2 holographic bounties. One for Jace Rowan, one for Saren Kale. The sums were staggering. The assassin laughed, a wet, gurgling sound. Doesn't matter if I fail. Every hunter in Meridian has the contract. Who issued it? Saren snarled, leaning closer. The assassin looked at her with glazed eyes. The order came from the top. Priority Alpha, Alliance Command, and the House of Kale. He coughed, blood bubbling on his lips. They don't want you back, Princess. They want you dead. The war. The war is good for business. Jace looked at Saren. The confirmation hit them both like a physical weight. It wasn't just a rogue faction. It was the leadership, the people they had sworn to serve. We are alone, Saren whispered, the fight draining out of her. No, Jace said, standing up and pulling her with him. We're not alone. We have the truth, and we have each other. He looked down the corridor. He could hear heavy boots approaching, the hotel security, or more assassins. We need to move, Jace said. Saren nodded. She wiped the blood from her lip. Where do we go? Jace looked at the data pad. He looked at the vast network of the galaxy map. We go to the one place they won't look, Jace said. We go to the Gloam market. If we want to survive, we need to buy a new identity, or sell an old one. He took her hand, and this time, he didn't let go. The Gloam market did not exist on any official schematic of Outpost Meridian. It was a tumor growing in the station's lower intestine, a sprawling network of damp tunnels and repurposed coolant tanks where the air scrubbers were choked with the smell of ozone, frying circuitry, and desperate biology. Jace Rowan pulled the collar of his stolen jacket up, shielding his face from the acidic steam venting from overhead pipes. Beside him, Saren moved with a predator's grace, though she kept her head down. The neon signage here was not the flashy blue and pink of the upper levels. It was a sickly green and deep arterial red, advertising things that were illegal in 3 sectors. Memory splicing, identity scrubbing, biogenetic grafting. We are looking for a broker named Crix, Jace murmured, keeping his voice below the roar of the crowd. My contact said he deals in information that bleeds. Saren scanned the throng. Her sensory input was dialed to the maximum. To Jace, the crowd was a mass of spacers, cyborgs, and criminals. To Saren, it was a tapestry of heartbeats. She could hear the flutter of fear in a thief's chest, the slow, heavy thud of a heavy worlder on stims, and the cold, rhythmic ticking of artificial hearts. There, she whispered. She pointed to a stall built inside the hollowed-out skull of a massive, long-dead space whale. Inside, a small, multi-limbed creature was soldering a chip into the back of a customer's neck. They pushed through the crowd. Jace slammed the assassin's datapad onto the counter. I need a decryption key, Jace said flatly, and a name. The broker, Crix, swiveled 4 of his eyes toward Jace. He chittered, a sound like dry leaves skittering on pavement. Encryption is expensive, human. Names are lethal. I trade in flesh and memories. What do you have? Jace hesitated. They had credits, but not enough for this level of work. Saren stepped forward. She lowered her hood. The crimson light of her eyes cut through the gloom of the stall. I have the source, she said. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small glass vial. Inside, suspended in a stasis gel, was a single drop of blood she had harvested from the assassin's blade before they fled the hotel. Crix recoiled, his mandibles clicking rapidly. Sangari blood witchery. That is forbidden tech here. It is not tech, Saren said, her voice silky and dangerous. It is biology. And if you give us the access to your memory dive rig, I will show you exactly who paid for this hit. And I will let you keep the recording. A record of a high-level alliance treason? That is worth more than this entire market. The broker paused, greed warred with fear in his multifaceted eyes. Greed won. The chair, Crix hissed, pointing to a rusted medical seat in the back. But if you fry my system, I take your eyes as payment. Jace grabbed Saren's arm as she moved toward the chair. Are you sure about this? You said reading dead blood is toxic. Saren finished. It is. It is like drinking poison to taste the wine. But we need to know who is pulling the strings. She sat in the chair. Crix wired the neural interface to her temples. Jace stood guard, his hand hovering near the pistol concealed in his waistband. Saren uncorked the vial. She tipped her head back and let the single drop of dark, congealed blood fall onto her tongue. The reaction was violent. She gasped, her back arching off the chair, her eyes rolled back, turning entirely white. On the monitors above her, static screamed, then coalesced into a jagged first-person video feed. They were seeing what the assassin had seen. Flash. A rainy alleyway on a colony world. A figure in a heavy cloak handing over a credit chip. Flash. A holographic message. A face, distorted but recognizable. Admiral Vance, the human hero of the border wars. Flash. Vance speaking to a shadow. A tall, elegant shadow in Sangari robes. Focus! Saren! Jace shouted, seeing her body convulse. On the screen, the shadow stepped into the light. The resolution was grainy, filtered through the assassin's chemical-soaked memory. But the face was clear. High cheekbones, pale skin, eyes of cold, arrogant gold. It was a Sangari High Counselor. Saren screamed. It wasn't a scream of pain, but of recognition and betrayal. The connection severed. The monitors blew out in a shower of sparks. Saren slumped forward, coughing violently. Jace was there instantly, catching her before she hit the floor. He's got her, Saren gasped, clutching Jace's shirt. Her skin was burning hot, her tremors shaking them both. I saw him. I tasted his scent. Who? Jace asked, holding her tight, ignoring the broker who was frantically trying to save his data. The counselor, she whispered. It was Vorian, my brother's advisor, the right hand of House Kale. She looked up at Jace, her eyes swimming with tears of nausea and shock. My own family. They are not just complicit. Jace. They are the architects. Jace pulled her into his chest, wrapping his arms around her protective shell. He felt the horror radiating off her, the realization that the people who raised her were the ones who had paid to have her erased. I'm sorry, he whispered into her hair. I'm so sorry I made you do that. I had to know. She shuddered. Jace looked at the broker. We're leaving. Now. Getting off Outpost Meridian required a ship that didn't ask questions and a pilot who didn't care about the answers. They found both in a hangar bay that smelled of engine grease and cheap cigars. The pilot was a Tellarite smuggler named Rax. He was short, broad, and had a beard that looked like it could scrub the hull of his ship. The Rusty Kestrel, 2,000 credits. Rax grunted, looking at Jace. Half now. Half when we land, and no cargo that breathes, bleeds, or screams. We are the cargo, Jace said, tossing a credit chip to the alien, and we need to go to Noctis Vir. Rax caught the chip, but his eyes narrowed as he looked past Jace to Saren, who was standing in the shadows of the loading ramp. She was still pale from the memory dive, but her posture was rigid, regal. That's a Sangari, Rax rumbled, a highborn, by the look of that bone structure. You humans have a death wish? Taking a vampire princess to the homeworld is like taking a match to a fuel dump. She's with me, Jace said, his voice hard. Rax laughed, a sound like gravel in a blender. With you? You're a grunt, kid. I can smell the trench mud on you. And she looks like she eats grunts for breakfast. Saren stepped forward. The light caught the predatory curve of her smile. Only when I am late for dinner, Pilot, she said smoothly. And I am currently very full. Do we have a deal? Or do I need to find a pilot who values his credits more than his curiosity? Rax stared at her, then grinned, revealing a row of gold teeth. I like her. She's scary. Get on board. But if she bites me, I'm charging you double. The journey to Noctis Vir took 3 standard days. When they dropped out of hyperspace, Jace stared out the viewport, stunned into silence. The Sangari homeworld was a planet of eternal twilight. It did not orbit a sun but a massive gas giant that reflected a pale, ghostly luminescence. The atmosphere was thick, charged with magnetic auroras that painted the sky in shifting curtains of violet, emerald, and deep indigo. The cities were not built on the ground but carved directly into the obsidian cliffs that rose kilometers high above the dark, churning oceans. Spires of black glass twisted upward like thorns, connected by bridges of shimmering hard light. It's beautiful, Jace admitted, and terrifying. It is home, Saren said quietly, standing beside him. But it feels cold. They landed at a private docking spire belonging to House Kale. Rax dumped them on the platform and took off before the landing struts had fully cooled, clearly eager to be gone from vampire space. Jace felt the eyes on him immediately. The platform was crowded with Sangari courtiers and guards. They were tall, elegant, and moved with a fluidity that made Jace feel clumsy and heavy. They wore robes of silk and armor of spun ceramic, and they were all staring. To them, Jace was an anomaly, a human in military fatigues, walking freely among the predators. He felt the waves of telepathic pressure, curiosity, disdain, hunger. The air was filled with a low, humming music that seemed to vibrate directly in his skull, bypassing his ears. Relax, Saren murmured, her hand brushing his. They can smell your adrenaline. It smells like fear. I am afraid, Jace muttered. There are 100 of them and one of me. We are entering the Hall of Ancestors, she said, guiding him toward a massive set of doors. Stay close. Do not make eye contact. And for the love of the stars, do not bleed. Inside, the sensory overload was intense. The hall was a vast cavern illuminated by bioluminescent moss and floating globes of fire. In the center of the room was a sunken pool filled with a thick, red liquid. Sangari nobles lounged around the pool, dipping crystal goblets into the fluid. The smell of copper and iron was overwhelming. Jace gagged slightly. Is that synthetic? Saren said quickly. Mostly. It is a social ritual, a communal sharing. A tall male Sangari with hair like spun silver detached himself from a group and glided toward them. He ignored Saren completely and circled Jace, sniffing the air. Delightful, the Sangari purred. Rough, earthy, a soldier's vintage. Tell me, human, does the adrenaline sweeten the vein? He reached out a hand, his claws extending slightly, aiming to stroke Jace's neck. Jace tensed, his hand going for his knife, but Saren was faster. She slammed her hand against the male's chest, shoving him back with enough force to crack the stone floor beneath his boots. He is claimed, she snarled. The entire hall went silent. The music stopped. Saren stood between Jace and the court, her fangs fully bared, her eyes blazing with a crimson intensity that outshone every light in the room. He is my bloodbound, she announced, her voice echoing off the obsidian walls. Touch him, and I will drain you dry before you hit the floor. The male looked at Saren, then at Jace. He sneered, but he backed away. A pet, he scoffed. How quaint. Lady Saren. Saren grabbed Jace's arm, her grip bruising. Walk, she commanded. The reception with her family was a private affair, held in the upper spires of the Kale estate. The room was stark, elegant, and cold. Saren's mother, matriarch Lyra, sat on a throne of woven bone. She looked exactly like Saren, but harder. Where Saren was a storm, Lyra was a glacier. Beside her stood Valen, Saren's older brother, the current head of the house. They did not look happy to see her. "You survive," Lyra said. Her tone suggested this was a calculation error she was currently correcting. "I survive," Saren said, standing tall. "Despite the orbital lance, despite the drones, despite the assassins you sent to Meridian." Valen stepped forward. He poured a glass of wine, his movements languid. "We did not send the assassins, sister. That was the alliance. We merely facilitated the opportunity." "Why?" Saren asked, her voice trembling with suppressed rage. "Because the seat on the covert council was promised to House Kale," Lyra said coldly. "In exchange for your delivery as a war bride. The treaty is a farce. Saren, we all know this. The war drives our economy, it fuels our dominance. But for the council to embrace us, we needed to show we were willing to sacrifice." Saren stared at her mother. "You sold me, not for peace, but for profit." "We sold you for power," Valen corrected. "You were a tool, Saren, a pretty object to be traded. You were never meant to survive the crash. You were meant to be a tragic martyr, a rallying cry for the next offensive." He looked at Jace with utter disgust. "Instead, you bonded with this meat. You polluted our bloodline. You have made us a laughingstock." Jace stepped forward. He couldn't help himself. "She's not a tool," he said, his voice grating in the silence. "She's your daughter." Lyra looked at Jace as if a chair had just spoken. "Silence. Human," she said. "You are only alive because killing you now would trigger a psychic backlash that might damage Saren's mind further. But do not mistake tolerance for mercy." She turned back to Saren. "You will remain here, confined to the estate. The bond will be studied, perhaps broken. And if it cannot be broken, then we will simply wait for the human to die of natural causes. Their lives are so very short." "Come," Valen said to the guards. "Escort them to the guest wing." The guest wing opened onto a wide balcony overlooking the city of Noctis Vir. The wind here was cold, carrying the scent of alien oceans and ozone. Saren stood at the railing, her back to Jace. She was shaking. Jace walked up behind her, and then he didn't touch her, and he just stood there, offering his presence as a shield against the cold. "They are right," Saren whispered. Her voice was broken. "I was never a person to them. I was currency." She turned around. Her face was wet with tears, her eyes red-rimmed. "All my life, I tried to be perfect, the perfect daughter, the perfect diplomat. I thought if I was valuable enough, they would love me." She looked down at her hands. "But you didn't know me. You owed me nothing. You were an enemy soldier. And yet..." She reached out and took Jace's left arm. She rolled up his sleeve, exposing the scar in the crook of his elbow where he had inserted the transfusion needle. It was a small white mark against his tan skin. "You gave me this," she said softly. "You gave me life. You gave me worth." She lifted his arm. She didn't bite him. She pressed her lips to the scar. It was a gesture of profound reverence, more intimate than any kiss they could have shared. Jace felt a jolt of electricity run through him. The bond flared, warm and golden, washing away the cold of the obsidian city. "Saren," Jace said, his voice rough. "I didn't save you because I wanted a reward. I saved you because..." "Because why?" she asked while looking up at him. Her face was inches from his. "Because when I looked at you in that pod, I didn't see an alien, Jace admitted. I saw someone who was just as lonely as I was. He reached up and cupped her cheek. His thumb brushed the sharp line of her jaw. I'm terrified, Saren, not of your family and not of the war. I'm terrified of how much I need you right now. And it's not just the blood. It's because you are the only person in this galaxy who sees me. Not as a soldier, not as a number, but as Jace. Saren closed her eyes, leaning into his touch. Her defensive walls, built over centuries of aristocratic training, crumbled completely. You are mine, Jace Rowan, she whispered fiercely, and I am yours. He kissed her. It was desperate and hungry, a collision of two people clinging to each other in the dark. He tasted the cool, metallic tang of her mouth. She tasted the salt and heat of his. For a moment, there was no war, no conspiracy, just the two of them, suspended above the alien abyss. A polite cough interrupted them. They broke apart, Jace's hand dropping to his weapon. A young Sangari stood in the doorway. He was lanky, wearing the robes of a scholar rather than a courtier. He looked nervous. I apologize, the youth stammered. I am Kalen, Saren's cousin. I remember you, Saren said, wiping her eyes and stepping in front of Jace. You were the one who preferred data streams to duels. Kalen nodded. I still do. And I heard what Matriarch Lyra said about the council. He looked around nervously, then pulled a data crystal from his robe. I work in the archives, he whispered. Valen is careless with his encryption because he believes no one in the house would dare spy on him. But I do not want a war. Saren, my friends are being drafted to the fleet. They will die for this profit. He handed the crystal to Saren. This is the flight plan for the Concordia, he said, the joint flagship. The summit is happening there in 2 days. Admiral Vance and High Counselor Vorian are meeting to finalize the next phase of the conflict. They call it Operation Cinder. They plan to bomb a neutral colony and blame the other side to break the ceasefire permanently. Saren took the crystal, her hand trembling. This proves it. Yes, Kalen said, but the file is locked to the ship's internal network. You cannot broadcast it from here. You have to be on the Concordia to access the encryption key and release it to the public news feeds. Thank you, Kalen, Saren said. The youth bowed and vanished back into the shadows. Saren turned to Jace. She plugged the crystal into the assassin's data pad. A hologram of a massive starship materialized between them. The Concordia, Saren said, the pride of the joint fleet. It will be the most heavily guarded ship in the sector. We have to get on board, Jace said, studying the schematic. It is suicide, Saren said. Probably, Jace agreed. But if we don't, millions of people die, including us. He looked at her. We can use the smuggler. Rax said he runs supplies to the fleet, if we can get into the cargo hold. Saren shook her head. Jace, listen to me. If we are caught, they will kill you instantly. They might keep me alive for the bond, but you are expendable to them. I know, Jace said quietly. No, you do not know. Saren grabbed his shoulders. If you die, Jace, it will break me. The bond, if the anchor is destroyed violently, the backlash wipes the Sangari's mind. I will be a husk, or I will die with you. Jace took her hands. Saren, look at me. He waited until her crimson eyes met his. I'm a soldier. I signed up to die for something that mattered. For 10 years. I fought for dirt and lies. Finally, I have a chance to fight for the truth. He squeezed her hands. I'm going, with or without you. but I'd really prefer with you. Saren stared at him. She saw the stubborn set of his jaw, the quiet courage that she had tasted in his blood since the very first moment. You are a fool, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. But then she pulled him close, burying her face in his neck. You don't understand, Jace, she said into his skin. I literally cannot let you go. If you die for this alone, you betray the bond, and you betray me. So we go together. She pulled back, her eyes dry and hard as diamonds. We go to the Concordia, we crash their summit, and we burn their conspiracy to the ground. The Concordia was less a ship and more a floating city-state built of hubris and polished chrome. It was a joint flagship, the first of its kind, designed to house both Human Alliance and Sangari Dominion crew. The corridors were wide enough for a parade, the lighting a diplomatic compromise between Human Standard White and Sangari Bioluminescent Violet. Jace Rowan tugged at the collar of his dress uniform. It wasn't Alliance gray. It was the stark, high-collared black livery of a House Kale servant. It fit him perfectly, which somehow made him feel more like an imposter. Stop fidgeting, Saren murmured. She walked a half-step ahead of him, her head high. She wore the crimson robes of a high-born diplomat, her face veiled in a mesh of silver filigree that obscured her features from casual scanners. I feel like a penguin in a straitjacket, Jace muttered, keeping his eyes forward. And this data pad is heavy. It contains the surveillance spikes, Saren replied, her voice barely a breath. And you look adequate for a human. Jace smirked. High praise, you look terrifying. Good. Fear is a better disguise than any hologram. They passed a checkpoint. 2 guards, 1 human marine, 1 Sangari shock trooper scanned their credentials. The forged IDs Rax had acquired on Meridian held up. Saren was Lady Vila of a minor tributary house. Jace was her bonded attendant. The Sangari guard sniffed the air as Jace passed. He smells of ozone. The guard clicked. He is clumsy with the ion polishers, Saren said imperiously, not breaking stride. It is hard to find good help in the colonies. The guard grunted and waved them through. Once they were clear, Jace let out a breath. That was too close. He smelled the fear on me. He smelled the cheap cologne we bought at the spaceport, Saren corrected. It masks the adrenaline. They reached the lift to the executive deck. The doors slid open to reveal a space of breathtaking opulence. The floor was transparent plasteel, looking down into the churning blue heart of the ship's reactor core. The walls were lined with statues of heroes from both sides of the war. The council chamber was at the end of the hall. It was currently empty. The summit scheduled to begin in 20 minutes. We have to be fast, Saren said. They entered the chamber. It was a circular room dominated by a massive obsidian table. Jace moved to the human side of the table, pulling small, limpet-sized sensors from his datapad. He slid under the table, attaching them to the underside of the chairs. Saren moved to the Sangari side, placing crystal resonators in the decorative sconces. Hurry, she hissed. I hear footsteps. I'm going as fast as I can, Jace whispered, his hands shaking slightly. They met in the center of the room. Jace stood up, brushing dust from his knees. Done, he said. Saren looked at him. Her eyes behind the veil were wide, the crimson swirling with anxiety. She reached out and squeezed his hand. Her thumb pressed into the pulse point of his wrist. Beat. 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 The rhythm of his heart seemed to steady her. Whatever happens, she whispered, do not engage unless I give the signal. I'm a lover, not a fighter, Jace quipped, though his other hand was resting near the concealed stun baton in his sash. The doors hissed open, voices, laughter. Jace and Saren immediately snapped into their roles. Saren turned on him, her voice raising in aristocratic disdain. "You incompetent fool," she shouted, slapping the datapad from his hand. "I asked for the blue wine, not the red. Do you want to insult the Admiral?" "I apologize, my lady," Jace stammered, dropping to one knee to gather the scattered stylus pens. "I will fetch it immediately." The group of dignitaries entering the room paused, amused by the domestic scene. "Servants," Admiral Vance chuckled, stepping into the room. He was a bear of a man, his chest heavy with medals. "Always the same, aren't they?" High Counselor Vorian glided in beside him. He was tall, gaunt, and terrifyingly elegant. He glanced at Saren. "Discipline is a dying art," he murmured. "Leave him, my dear. We have matters of state to discuss." Saren bowed her head. "As you wish, Counselor." She signaled Jace with a sharp flick of her wrist. He scrambled up, bowing deeply, and backed out of the room, retreating into the shadows of the servants' alcove. Saren followed him, stopping just inside the alcove's service hatch. The heavy doors of the chamber sealed. Jace pulled out a receiver. He handed an earbud to Saren. "We're live," he whispered. They huddled in the cramped maintenance nook, shoulder to shoulder, listening to the voices from the other room. Admiral Vance's voice came through clear and jovial. "So, the preparations for Cinder are complete?" Vorian's voice was like dry ice. "The fleet is in position. The charges are set on the colony of Haven. When they detonate, the signature will match Sangari bioplasma." "And the media?" Vance asked. "Primed," Vorian replied. "They will report a massacre. The outrage will be sufficient. The peace talks will be abandoned by morning. And the appropriation bill for the new dreadnoughts will pass the Senate by noon." Jace felt sick. Haven was a civilian colony. 3 million people. They're monsters, he whispered. "Wait," Saren hissed. "Listen." "And what of the Lady Saren?" Vance asked. "Is the loose end tied up?" "We are tracking them," Vorian said. "But the situation has presented a unique opportunity. The bond she formed with the human. Our scientists are fascinated. A biological loyalty tether? If we could replicate that. Imagine soldiers who literally cannot disobey orders because their physiology would reject it." Vance whistled. "Weaponized loyalty. That's worth more than the war itself." Jace looked at Saren. She was trembling, her face pale. They weren't just going to kill her. They wanted to dissect her, to turn the one beautiful thing that had happened to them, the trust, the connection, into a leash. "We have enough," Jace said. "We upload this now." He tapped the transmit key on his datapad. Nothing happened. He tapped it again. Error. Signal jammed. Jace looked at the screen. A red skull icon flashed. Counter-surveillance, Saren realized, her eyes widening. They knew. Suddenly, the earbud shrieked with feedback. The maintenance nook door blew inward with a concussive blast. Jace was thrown back against the pipes. Smoke filled the small space. "Secure them!" a voice shouted. Jace rolled, coughing. Through the haze, he saw armored figures swarming the corridor. "Run!" Jace yelled. He grabbed Saren's hand and they sprinted down the service tunnel. Energy bolts sizzled past them, melting the wall panels when they reached a junction. 3 guards blocked the path. Saren didn't slow down. She raised her hand. A blast of crimson telekinetic force slamming the guards into the bulkhead. "Keep moving," she shouted. They scrambled up a ladder, emerging onto the reactor observation deck. It was a dark, industrial catwalk suspended over the glowing blue singularity of the ship's drive core. Jace checked his datapad. "The transmitter is fried. We can't broadcast. We have to find another terminal." Saren yelled over the roar of the drive. A bolt of plasma struck the railing next to Jace's hand, showering him with molten metal. He cried out, stumbling, "Jace!" Saren grabbed him, pulling him behind a heavy support strut. They were pinned down. Security teams were pouring onto the catwalk from both ends. Then, the firing stopped. A slow, rhythmic clapping echoed through the vast chamber. High Counselor Vorian walked onto the catwalk. He was flanked by two elite Sangari Praetorians. He looked bored. Running is so undignified. "Saren," Vorian called out, especially in those robes. Saren stood up, pulling Jace with her. She glared at the counselor. "You are a traitor to your blood, Vorian," she spat. "And you are a disappointment to yours." Vorian countered smoothly. He gestured to Jace. "Look at you, bonding with livestock. It is perverse." He took a step closer. "The Admiral wants you dead, but I am a merciful male. I offer you a choice." He pointed a long, clawed finger at Jace. "Surrender, submit to the research team, and let us study the bond, and if you do, the human lives. We will send him to a labor camp. He will survive." "And if I refuse?" Saren asked, her voice shaking. Vorian smiled. It was not a nice smile. "Then I will kill him right here, and I will watch your mind shatter from the backlash." Saren looked at Jace. He was bleeding from a cut on his forehead. He looked exhausted, dirty, and utterly defiant. "Jace," she whispered. "Don't do it," Jace said, gripping her arm. "Don't you dare! He lives," Saren said to Vorian. "You swear it?" "Saren," Jace shouted. "I swear it on the blood of the ancestors." Vorian lied. Saren took a step forward, her hands raising in surrender. I accept." "No!" Jace lunged, grabbing her waist and pulling her back. "You are not a bargaining chip. I told you, we do this together or not at all." He looked at Vorian. "You want a war? You've got one." Jace reached into his sash. He didn't pull the stun baton. He pulled a small, jagged device he had bought from the tech monger in the Gloam market. A localized holonet override. He jammed it into the data port of the reactor control console behind them. "What are you doing?" Saren hissed. "Improvising." Jace gritted out. He tapped a sequence on the console. The ship's internal lights flickered. The massive holographic projectors in the council chamber above them and on the outer hull of the ship glitched. "I'm rerouting the projector grid," Jace muttered. "But the signal is weak. I need an amplifier." He looked at Saren. "I need you." "Me?" "The bond," Jace said. "You said it's psionic. You said we share memories. If we link up, if you push the signal through me, we can broadcast directly from our minds." Saren stared at him. That could kill us both." The feedback loop. "Do you have a better idea?" Jace asked, glancing at the guards who were raising their weapons. Saren looked at Vorian, then at Jace. A fierce, wild light ignited in her eyes. "Do it," she said. "Take them," Vorian shouted, realizing something was wrong. Jace grabbed Saren's face. He didn't kiss her. He pressed his forehead against hers. "Focus," he commanded. "Focus on the council chamber. Now focus on what we heard." Saren closed her eyes. She reached into the bond, grabbing the thread of Jace's mind. She pulled. The world dissolved into white fire. They weren't on the catwalk anymore. They were everywhere. They were the ship. But before the connection could stabilize, a shockwave hit them. Not a physical one, a disruption field. Jace was ripped away from her. He was thrown backward, skidding across the grate. A figure stepped out from the shadows behind the console. It was Kalen, the young cousin who had given them the flight plan. He held a disruption wand. His face was tear-streaked. "I'm sorry." "Saren, Kalen wept. They threatened my mother. They said they would purge the whole family. Betrayal. It tasted like ash in Saren's mouth. Guards swarmed them. Jace was pinned to the floor, a boot on his neck. Saren was grabbed by the arms, forced to her knees. Vorian walked up to her. He tutted softly. Foolish. He looked at the guards. Bring them to the chamber. The summit has started. Let us make an example of them. The council chamber was full now. Dozens of diplomats, generals, and news drones were seated around the obsidian table. The air was thick with the scent of expensive wine and lies. The doors opened. Jace and Saren were dragged in. They were bruised, bleeding, and bound in energy shackles. Silence fell over the room. Admiral Vance stood up. He looked annoyed. Is this necessary? Vorian? We are live on the galactic feed. It is vital, Vorian said, stepping up to the podium. He gestured to the prisoners. My esteemed colleagues, we have been discussing the threat to peace. Here it is. He pointed at Jace. A rogue soldier. A deserter who kidnapped a diplomat. He pointed at Saren. And a woman whose mind has been broken by Stockholm Syndrome and alien blood magic. They have been sabotaging our efforts, spreading lies about conspiracies to cover their own crimes. Vance nodded gravely. A tragic cross-species romance gone wrong. A cautionary tale. The news drone zoomed in. The faces of Jace and Saren were projected on screens across the fleet, across the Alliance, across the Dominion. Saren looked at Jace. He was on his knees beside her. He looked beaten. But then he winked. A tiny, almost imperceptible twitch of his eyelid. The device Jace had jammed into the console below was still active. It was waiting for a signal. A surge. Saren felt a calm settle over her. It was the calm of the hurricane's eye. She looked up at Vorian. You talk too much. Uncle. She turned to Jace. Stop pretending, she said, her voice clear and carrying to every microphone in the room. Pretending what? Jace asked, his voice rough. Pretending you do not want to choose me over your orders. She leaned in. The guards stepped forward to stop her, but they were too slow. Saren didn't attack. She didn't try to run. She buried her fangs in Jace's wrist. It wasn't a gentle nip. It was a deep, desperate bite. She drank. The crowd gasped. The cameras flashed. Jace didn't pull away. He shoved his wrist into her mouth. The surge was instantaneous. Blood met blood. Mind met mind. The bond, stressed to the breaking point by adrenaline and fear, snapped open like a floodgate. Jace saw the universe through Saren's eyes, a kaleidoscope of energy and emotion. Saren felt the iron will of Jace's conviction. Now, they thought together. They pushed. They pushed the memory of the conversation in the maintenance nook. They pushed the image of the payment to the assassin. They pushed the flight logs of the orbital lance strike. They pushed it all through the bond, amplifying it with Saren's psionic genetics, and funneled it into the hijacked projector grid. The council chamber exploded with light. The air above the table shimmered. Giant, ghostly holograms appeared. It was Admiral Vance's face, distorted but undeniable. The peace talks will be abandoned by morning. And the appropriation bill will pass. It was Vorian's voice. We will report a massacre. The outrage will be sufficient. The audio boomed through the chamber, deafening in its clarity. It wasn't just in the room. The signal, boosted by the ship's massive comms array, was beaming to every ship in the fleet, to the news networks on Earth, to the public squares on Noctis Vir. Pandemonium. Vance turned pale. Cut the feed. Cut it now. Vorian looked at the hologram of his own face, his arrogance crumbling into horror. It's not stopping, a tech shouted. It's coming from them. He pointed at Jace and Saren. They were glowing, A soft violet light radiated from their joined bodies. Saren's mouth was still on Jace's wrist. His eyes were rolled back, his body rigid. They were the transmitter. "Kill them!" Vance screamed, drawing his sidearm. Jace and Saren broke the connection, gasping for air. They slumped against each other, weak, dizzy, but alive. The room erupted into chaos. Diplomats were shouting, guards were looking at their commanders, then at the holograms, unsure who to shoot. Vance aimed his pistol at Jace's head, but before he could pull the trigger, the doors to the chamber blew open. It wasn't security. It was the bridge crew. A young ensign, face flushed with anger, stood there with a squad of Marines who had been watching the broadcast. "Sir, step away from the prisoners," the ensign ordered, his weapon trained on the admiral. "This is mutiny," Vance roared. "No, sir," the ensign said, looking at the hologram still playing the admiral's confession above them. "This is justice." Saren wiped the blood from her lips. She looked at Jace. He was pale, sweating, but grinning like a maniac. "We did it," he rasped. Saren rested her forehead against his. "We are not done yet," she whispered, looking at the chaos around them. "But it is a good start." The silence that followed the broadcast lasted less than a second, but it felt like a held breath spanning the entire galaxy. Then, the screaming started. It began not with the diplomats in the room, but from the comms channels open on the walls. The bridge of the Concordia, the flight decks of the escort frigates, the listening posts on the colony worlds, they all erupted at once. The confession of Admiral Vance and Counselor Vorian hung in the air, a ghost that refused to be exorcised, looping over and over on the massive holographic displays. In the council chamber, the paralysis broke with the crack of a kinetic pistol. Admiral Vance, his face a mask of purple fury, fired blindly at the podium where Jace and Saren stood. The shot went wide, shattering a crystalline vase of Sangari flowers, sending shards of glass raining down like diamonds. "Kill them!" Vance roared, his voice cracking. "Kill the traitors!" The room descended into bedlam. Half the security detail raised their weapons, trained on the Admiral's command. The other half, the younger soldiers and the enlisted guard, hesitated, their eyes darting from the damning holograms to the flesh and blood commanders who had betrayed them. Jace did not wait to see who would win the debate. "Move!" he shouted, grabbing Saren's hand. They moved not as two people, but as a single organism. The blood surge from Saren's recent feeding was still coursing through them, a high-octane fuel that dissolved the lag between thought and action. Jace saw the room through his own eyes, but he felt the threats through Saren's skin. He felt the tension in a guard's trigger finger 3 meters to his left before the muscle even contracted. He ducked, dragging Saren down, just as a plasma bolt scorched the air where his head had been. Saren did not look. She simply extended her hand, palm open. A pulse of telekinetic force threw a heavy oak chair into the path of the advancing loyalist troopers, creating a barricade. She pivoted, her crimson skirt flaring, and pointed toward the service hatch. 3 degrees right, she commanded, her voice echoing in Jace's skull. Jace fired. He didn't aim. He let her spatial awareness guide his hand. His stun round hit a hidden panel in the wall, shorting the door mechanism and blasting the hatch open. They scrambled through, Jace turning to fire a suppression volley into the doorway to cover their retreat. The corridor outside was a war zone. The mutiny had spread instantly. Alliance Marines were wrestling with their own officers. Sangari shock troops were engaging in hand-to-hand combat with the Praetorian Guard. The air was thick with the smell of ozone and burnt meat. "We need to get to the escape pods," Jace yelled over the din of klaxons. "No," Saren gasped, stumbling as a wave of psychic feedback from the dying soldiers hit her. Listen to the ship. Jace paused, pressing his back against the bulkhead. He heard it then. A deep, grinding groan, like a dying whale. The lights in the corridor shifted from the red of alert to a terrifying, strobing white. Protocol 0 initiated. The ship's AI announced, its voice void of all emotion. Reactor containment purge in 90 seconds. All hands, brace for scuttling. Jace looked at Saren. His blood ran cold. Scuttling? He is burning it down, Saren whispered, her eyes wide with horror. Vance, he knows he cannot spin this. He is overloading the singularity core. He is going to vaporize the Concordia and everyone on it to erase the evidence. If that core breaches, it won't just destroy the ship, Jace realized. The blast radius will take out half the fleet in formation. It'll be a massacre. We cannot run, Saren said, her posture shifting from flight to fight. We have to stop the overload. They turned, sprinting away from the escape pods and toward the heart of the ship. The journey to the reactor nexus was a blur of violence. They fought through maintenance tunnels and service ladders, bypassing the main corridors where the riots were thickest. Every time a guard stepped out to intercept them, they moved with that uncanny, terrifying synchronization. Jace would duck a swing he couldn't see. Saren would deflect a shot she couldn't reach. They were a whirlwind of gray and crimson, a binary star system of desperate survival. They burst onto the reactor observation deck, the same catwalk where they had been captured hours before. The scene was apocalyptic. The core below them was no longer a calm blue sphere. It was a roiling, screaming mass of white fire, expanding against its magnetic containment fields. The heat was physical, a wall that slammed into them the moment the doors opened. The control console was unmanned. The technicians had fled or been killed. On the main screen, a countdown timer flashed in jagged red numbers. 60 seconds. Jace ran to the console, his fingers flying over the haptic interface. "I'm locked out," he shouted, sweat stinging his eyes. Vance hard-coded the purge from the bridge. "I can't override the command sequence." Saren walked to the edge of the railing. She looked down into the blinding light of the singularity. The wind from the thermal updraft whipped her hair around her face like a dark halo. "The systems are digital," she shouted over the roar, "but the energy is biological. It is bioplasma, grown from Sangari tech." She turned to Jace. Her face was pale, illuminated by the deadly glow of the core. "I can siphon it," she said. "I can act as a grounding rod. If I step into the field, I can channel the excess energy through my own biomatrix and disperse it into the void." Jace stared at her. "You'll burn up. That's the output of a small sun." "Saren, I am Sangari," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "My cells are designed to process high-energy states, but what? I do not have the fuel," she admitted. "I am drained from the broadcast. I am empty. Jace, if I try to channel this now, the first wave will turn me to ash." She looked at him. Her eyes were filled with a terrible, devastating clarity. "I need power. Massive, immediate caloric energy to regenerate my cells faster than the plasma destroys them." Jace understood. The realization hit him like a physical blow to the chest. He didn't flinch. He didn't hesitate. He stepped away from the useless console and walked toward her. "Me," he said. Saren recoiled, shaking her head. "No. Jace, no. It would not be a sip. It would not be a transfusion. To hold back this fire, I would have to drink deep. I would have to take enough to stop your heart." She grabbed the lapels of his uniform, tears streaming down her face, evaporating instantly in the heat. "I will not do it," she sobbed. "I will not trade your life for a ship of strangers. I will not be the monster they say I am. Jace took her hands. He pulled them to his chest, holding them over his beating heart. Saren, look at me. He waited until she met his gaze. The crimson irises were fractured, terrified. There are 5,000 people on this ship, Jace said, his voice steady. There are 10,000 more in the fleet outside, and millions on the colonies who will die if this war keeps going. He stepped closer, closing the distance between them. I'm a soldier. Saren, I signed up to stand between the fire and the people who can't fight it. You told me once that you were just a tool, a weapon. But you're not. You're the shield. He brushed a strand of hair from her forehead. Don't let them win. Don't let Vance burn the truth. But you will die, she screamed, the sound tearing from her throat. And I will be left alone. No, Jace said softly. You won't be alone. You'll have me. In here. He tapped her temple, then her chest. We're bound, remember? If I go with you. The reactor groaned, a sound of tearing metal. The containment field flickered. 30 seconds. Jace grabbed the back of her neck and pulled her down. He kissed her. It wasn't a soft kiss. It was fierce, desperate, and tasted of salt and impending death. It was a vow. It was a goodbye. It was everything they had never had time to say in words, compressed into a single second of contact. When he pulled back, he tilted his head to the side, exposing the jugular. Do it, he commanded. Save them. Saren. Saren looked at him. She saw the fear in his eyes. He was human, and he was terrified of the dark. But she saw the love that was stronger than the fear. She let out a shuddering breath. I love you. Jace Rowan, she whispered. She sank her fangs into his neck. This time, there was no restraint, no careful sipping. She bit deep, hitting the artery, and she pulled. The sensation was not pain. It was an explosion. For Jace, the world dissolved into white. He felt his life force being ripped from his body, a rushing torrent of heat leaving his veins. But as it left, something else rushed in. Saren's mind. He wasn't just fading into the dark, he was falling into her. He felt her horror, her grief, but also the sudden roaring surge of power that his blood ignited in her veins. He felt her muscles knit, her senses expand to encompass the entire ship. He saw the reactor not as a machine, but as a living, angry beast. For Saren, the taste of him was overwhelming. It was heavy with iron, rich with oxygen, and blazing with his memories. She tasted his childhood in the cornfields of a colony world. She tasted the first time he held a rifle. She tasted the moment he saw her in the stasis pod and decided against all logic to save her. The memories fused. There was no Jace. There was no Saren. There was only us. A single blazing consciousness suspended in a moment of perfect, terrifying union. Empowered by his sacrifice. Saren released him. Jace crumpled to the deck, a husk, his skin gray, his chest barely moving. Saren did not look down. She could not. If she looked, she would break, and she had a job to do. She turned to the reactor. Her skin was glowing, not the soft bioluminescence of her people, but a blinding, radiant crimson. The blood energy was boiling under her skin, seeking release. She screamed, a sound of pure power, and leaped over the railing. She didn't fall. She hung in the air, suspended by telekinetic force, hovering directly in front of the singularity. She extended her arms. Focus, a voice whispered in her mind. It was faint, drifting, but it was there. Anchor the flow. You are the lens. Jace. He was still with her, holding on by a thread of psychic connection. Saren slammed her hands into the energy field. The white fire of the reactor surged toward her, hungry to consume. but it hit her biofield and shattered. She wasn't blocking it. She was drinking it. She absorbed the raw plasma, filtered it through her blood-enhanced nervous system, and redirected it. Beams of violet light erupted from her back, shooting out into the void of the containment chamber, harmlessly dissipating the overload. She was a living prism, bending the destruction into light. It hurt. It was agony beyond description. Her cells died and regenerated 1,000 times a second, fueled only by the blood Jace had given her. "Hold on," Jace's voice whispered. "Almost there. Think of the quiet. Think of the sunrise on Noctis Vir." Saren gritted her teeth, tears of blood streaming from her eyes. She poured every ounce of will she had into the task. She forced the singularity back, compressing it, cooling it, dominating it. The red countdown timer froze at 1 second, then it flickered and died. The roaring white light faded, collapsing back into a stable, humming blue sphere. The silence that followed was louder than the explosion would have been. Saren hung in the air for a heartbeat longer, glowing like a dying star. Then, the light faded. She fell. She hit the catwalk with a sickening thud, rolling to a stop a few feet from where Jace lay. The ship was safe. The broadcast continued. Outside, the fleet watched as the Concordia did not explode. They saw the mutiny succeed. The conspirators, stripped of their final desperate gambit, surrendered. Admiral Vance was dragged from the bridge in irons, but in the reactor room there was no victory celebration. Saren crawled across the metal grating. Her body felt shattered, her veins burned, but her mind was fixated on one thing: the silence in her head. The voice was gone. The thread had snapped. "Jace!" She reached him. He was lying on his back, eyes staring unseeingly at the ceiling. His skin was the color of ash. There was no rise and fall of his chest. Saren pressed her ear to his chest. "Nothing." "No," she whispered. "No, no, no." She shook him. "Wake up, soldier, that is an order. Wake up." He did not move. The bond was a dead wire hanging loose in the dark. Saren sat back, a primal keen building in her throat. She had saved the ship. She had saved the peace, and the cost was the only thing that made the universe bearable. She looked at her wrist. She looked at Jace's still form. "If my life is bound to yours, then your life is bound to mine." It was a theory, a desperate, unproven theory of Sangari biomysticism, the law of the return. If a bonded pair exchanged essence at the moment of death, the circuit could be reversed. The predator could become the provider, but it required a sacrifice of identity. To give Sangari blood to a human, it would change him. It would rewrite his genetic code. He would never be fully human again. Saren didn't care. She didn't care about species or purity or laws. She brought her wrist to her mouth and bit down, hard. Violet blood, glowing with the residual energy of the reactor she had just channeled, welled up. It crackled with static. She pried Jace's mouth open. "We walked together," she whispered, her voice fierce and broken, or not at all. She pressed her wrist to his lips, letting the luminous blood flow into him. She used her other hand to massage his throat, forcing him to swallow. For a long minute, nothing happened. Saren kept bleeding for him, feeling her own strength waning, her own consciousness dimming as she poured herself into the vessel of his body. "Please," she begged. "Jace, come back." Then, a twitch, a finger on Jace's left hand moved, then a gasp. A horrible, ragged sound like a drowning man breaking the surface. Jace arched off the floor, his back bowing, his eyes snapped open. They were not brown anymore. They were a swirling deep violet, ringed with gold. He coughed, turning to the side, retching as his body tried to process the alien biology flooding his system. Saren collapsed on top of him, burying her face in his neck, sobbing with relief. "You idiot," she wept. "You noble, stupid idiot." Jace lay there, blinking. The world looked different. The shadows were not dark. They were textured. He could hear the hum of the electricity in the walls. He could hear the frantic beating of Saren's heart against his ribs. He lifted a hand, staring at it. The veins beneath his skin pulsed with a faint purple light before fading back to normal. He looked at Saren. He didn't just see her face. He felt her relief washing over him like a warm tide. The bond wasn't just a thread anymore. It was a steel cable. "Did we win?" Jace rasped, his voice sounding deeper, resonating in his own chest. Saren pulled back, wiping her blood from his chin with her thumb. She smiled, a wobbly, tear-stained thing. "Yes," she said. "We won." Jace let his head fall back against the metal deck. "Good," he murmured, closing his eyes as exhaustion finally claimed him. "Wake me up when the peace treaty is signed." The medical facility on the orbital station sanctuary was quiet. It was a neutral zone, run by an order of monks who didn't care about politics, only healing. Jace woke up slowly. He expected pain. He expected the heavy drag of gravity. Instead, he felt light. He sat up. The room was dim, but to him, it was perfectly clear. He could see the dust motes dancing in the air filtration currents. He could see the structural stress fractures in the ceiling tiles. He took a deep breath. He could smell antiseptic, lilies, and her. Saren was sitting in a chair by the window, reading a data pad. She wore civilian clothes, a simple tunic and trousers. She looked tired, but the tension that had defined her posture for weeks was gone. She didn't look up, but she smiled. "You are staring," she said. "I'm trying to figure out why I can hear your heartbeat from across the room," Jace said. He swung his legs over the side of the bed. He felt strong, too strong. He gripped the bed rail, and the metal groaned, warping under his fingers. He let go quickly. "Oops." Saren finally looked up. Her eyes were warm. "You have been asleep for 9 days," she said. "The transition is intense. Your DNA has been resequenced. You are a hybrid now. Jace." Jace looked at his hands. "Am I going to start craving blood?" Saren laughed softly. "Perhaps. Or perhaps just very rare steaks. We will figure it out." She stood and walked over to him. She sat on the edge of the bed. "How do you feel?" she asked, her voice turning serious. Jace thought about it, and he felt different, sharper. But underneath the new senses, he was still himself. "I feel alive," he said. "Thanks to you." "We are even," Saren said. She traced the line of his jaw. "You died for me." "Jace, you actually died. I seem to recall a very specific conversation about walking together," Jace said, capturing her hand. "I'm a man of my word." Saren leaned in, resting her forehead against his. The psychic connection hummed between them, a constant comforting song. "You are half decent as a fledgling," she teased, her voice thick with emotion. "But you still need a haircut." Epilogue. 6 months later, the stage was set in the center of the great plaza on the colony world of Haven, the very world that was meant to be destroyed. The sky was blue, the sun warm. Thousands of people, a mix of humans and Sangari, filled the square. Jace stood behind the podium, adjusting the microphone. He wore a suit that was a blend of Alliance cut and Sangari silk. He looked healthy, though he wore tinted glasses to shield his sensitive eyes from the glare. Beside him, Saren stood tall and radiant in formal diplomatic robes, though she had forgone the armor. "We are not here to tell you that the past is forgotten," Jace said, his voice amplified across the crowd. "We are here to tell you that the future is a choice." He looked at the crowd. "For 100 years, we were told that fear was wisdom, that the only way to be safe was to destroy what we didn't understand." Saren stepped up to the microphone. "And we were told that power was domination," she added, "that strength meant standing alone. We were wrong." She looked at Jace, and the crowd saw the look that passed between them, a look of absolute, unshakable unity. "True strength," Saren said, "is the courage to bleed for the one you are supposed to hate, to choose empathy when every instinct screams for war." Jace grinned. "And to admit that sometimes, the terrifying alien vampire is actually just a diva who hates cramped elevators." The crowd laughed. Saren rolled her eyes, but she was smiling. "I will have you court-martialed," she threatened in a stage whisper the mic picked up perfectly. "You're not in my chain of command anymore." "Princess," Jace shot back. Later that evening, they sat on the balcony of their shared quarters in the diplomatic district. The sun was setting, painting the sky in colors that reminded Jace of the auroras on Noctis Vir. He poured 2 glasses of synthetic vintage, rich in iron, low in alcohol. He handed one to Saren, to the new council. He toasted. May they be less homicidal than the last one." "To transparency," Saren agreed, clinking her glass against his. They sat in comfortable silence for a while. Jace watched the city lights flicker on below. "Do you ever miss it?" he asked. "The clarity of the anger, knowing exactly who the enemy was?" Saren took a sip of her drink. "No. Anger is exhausting. I prefer this." She reached out and took his hand. Her touch was cool, grounding. "We have a lot of work to do," she said. "The treaty is fragile. There are still factions who hate us." "Let them hate," Jace said. "We've got the truth, and we've got the best security detail in the galaxy." "Meaning you?" Saren raised an eyebrow. "Meaning us," Jace corrected. He looked at her, his violet-tinged eyes locking with her crimson ones. "You know," Jace said softly, "the bond, Dr. Eris says that with time and focus we could dampen it, sever the dependency, so you wouldn't get sick if I went away for a week." Saren went still. "Is that what you want? To be free?" Jace shook his head. "No. That's the point, Saren. I don't stay because of the blood. I don't stay because biology forces me to." He kissed her knuckles. "I could walk away tomorrow. I could take the dampeners and go live on a farm. But I wouldn't. Every morning I wake up, I choose this. I choose you." Saren smiled, and it was the most beautiful thing Jace had ever seen. "That," she whispered, leaning in to kiss him, "is the only freedom that matters." And as the twin moons of Haven rose over a city that was no longer burning, the soldier and the war bride sat together in the dark, not as prisoners of fate, but as volunteers of love.